In the news tonight, the Prime Minister addresses the opening of a 3-day conference aimed at drawing up a national strategy on fighting fanaticism amid a growing threat from terrorist groups in the region. GCC ministers at an extraordinary meeting in Saudi Arabia call on the United Nations to take forceful action over Yemen amid concerns the country is collapsing after the Houthis took control. And at least one civilian is killed and 3 police wounded in a shooting at a meeting in Copenhagen attended by a controversial artist responsible for publishing offensive caricatures of Prophet Muhammad. Good evening and welcome to a new edition of the news. Here are the details. A conference entitled Towards a Comprehensive Strategy to Fight Fanaticism convened in Amman today to identify prospects and challenges for a national consensus on the issue. Addressing the opening session, Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour said Jordan took the initiative to stand firm against terrorism and radicalism in order to defend Islam, the homeland, the Arab nation and humanity at large. The meeting is organized by Al-Quds Center for Political Studies and brings together representatives of various political parties, ministers, parliamentarians, professional unions, as well as business leaders, social activists and the media. The 3-day meeting aims to come up with a strategy to uproot terrorism. Al-Quds Center Director Urayb Rantawi said the conference came to analyze the challenges facing our nation and our region, especially in light of mounting fanaticism and increased terror, noting that in addition to the military battle, the fight against terrorism must also address the ideology and beliefs behind it, utilizing intellectual, cultural and educational tools. The U.S.-led coalition staged 9 airstrikes on Daesh targets in Iraq and 4 in Syria. The attacks in Iraq hit tactical units, buildings, fighting positions, a rocket system and a facility where improvised explosive devices are made. The strikes in Syria hit near the city of Al-Raqqa and destroyed tanks and a bunker. The airstrikes, according to the Combined Joint Task Force, were carried out from early yesterday until earlier today. And Kurdish forces backed by U.S.-led airstrikes have regained control of at least 163 villages around the Syrian town of Kobani after driving back Daesh terrorists in the past 3 weeks. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said although the Kurds had recaptured many villages since winning back Kobani last month, their progress was slowed by renewed clashes to the west and southwest of the town, where Daesh had redirected its fighters. Syrian Kurds, also supported by Iraqi Kurdish Peshmerga forces, drove Daesh from the town near the Turkish border on January 26. And over to the situation on the ground in Iraq. About 25 militants affiliated to Daesh terrorist group, led by several suicide bombers, attacked Ain al-Asad air base in Anbar province. Iraqi officials said security forces repulsed the terror group and killed most of the assailants. The battle took place at the perimeter of the base, and it was not immediately clear whether the attackers were able to enter the facility. Daesh had attacked the Ain al-Asad base and the nearby town of al-Baghdadi yesterday, leading to sporadic clashes in the town. Scores of Lebanese laid flowers at Rafiq al-Hariri's grave in Beirut on the 10th anniversary of his assassination. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry commemorated Hariri in a statement late yesterday, saying the man known as Mr. Lebanon gave his country hope during its darkest days. He stood for peaceful change and the resolution of differences through conversations and not carnage, Kerry said, adding that he was assassinated because some feared he might succeed. The bomb that killed Hariri in 2005, packed in a van filled with the equivalent of 2.5 tons of high explosives, was detonated by an unidentified suicide bomber that also killed 21 others and wounded more than 200 as it ripped through a busy street. Visiting Lebanon for the first time in 3 years, former Prime Minister Saad al-Hariri attended a ceremony marking the anniversary of his father. Politicians and public figures expressed hope his return would help stabilize a country caught in political deadlock. And more violence in Egypt. In the Sinai Peninsula, 6 people, including 2 policemen, were wounded when 2 car bombs detonated near a police station. The explosions occurred after security forces fired at the 2 cars when the drivers refused to stop in the northern town of Sheikh Zoued. 2 other cars raced away from the scene under gunfire from security forces. In a separate attack, a soldier was shot in the head when unknown gunmen fired at him at a security checkpoint in central Sinai. No one claimed responsibility for the Sinai attacks. Yesterday, a roadside bomb in Cairo killed a police captain and wounded 8 people. And in Libya, gunmen have taken over several government buildings in the coastal city of Sirte, including several administrative offices and local television and radio stations. The state news agency said armed men forced government employees to leave at gunpoint after storming the building. In a separate incident, a bomb exploded at an oil pipeline from Libya's Sarir field, halting flows to Hariga port. Reports state firefighters continued to try and put out the fire until a late hour of the day. A spokesman for the National Oil Corporation said a tanker was loading up with crude at Hariga, adding that it could take up to 3 days to restore the pipeline. Hariga had just reopened after a strike there, and the country's 2 main oil ports and nearby fields are still closed after clashes between rival armed groups trying to gain control of the fields. Gulf Arab states called on the United Nations to take forceful action over Yemen amid concerns that the country is collapsing. At an extraordinary GCC ministerial meeting in the Saudi capital Riyadh, the ministers called on the UN Security Council to take a decision under Chapter 7 of the United Nations Charter, which allows the use of military force if there are breaches of the peace or acts of aggression.
We need the international community, especially the Security Council, not to hesitate in taking action and the necessary decisions and put an end to the illegal actions that have been taken in Yemen and work to implementation the will of the Yemeni people according to the Gulf Initiative and its mechanisms and the outputs of the national dialogue.
Yemen, meanwhile, saw a second day of nationwide demonstrations against the Houthis in less than a week after the movement dissolved parliament and took control. Tens of thousands of Yemenis demonstrated in several cities today against the rule of the Houthi movement. According to medics, 4 people were wounded when Houthi gunmen fired on the protesters in the central town of Ib. It has been 2 weeks since the Houthis took control of Yemen, causing upheaval in the country and forcing Western and Arab embassies to close their missions. France, the United States, Britain, Germany, Italy, and Saudi Arabia closed their missions in the capital Sana'a and withdrew staff, citing security concerns. And today, Spain and the United Arab Emirates announced the closure of their embassies in Sana'a. Fighting intensified in eastern Ukraine and shelling killed at least 1 person in Donetsk just hours before an agreed ceasefire takes effect at midnight. The truce envisages the creation of a neutral buffer zone and withdrawal of heavy weapons responsible for many of the 5,000 casualties in the conflict. However, local residents are skeptical that the truce will hold and are opting instead to flee to Russia. This report has more.
On board a bus in Russia's Rostov region, officials provide relief for refugees fleeing eastern Ukraine. Children receive medical checkups, while parents get a break from the violence that's killed 5,000 people in a year. Some are coming from Donetsk, where fighting remains the fiercest.
They are constantly shelling there, constant bombing. It's impossible to live there. It's unreal to live there, let alone with little kids. It's scary even to stroll on the streets.
The buses are among dozens crossing the border every day. Men, women, and children are taking everything they can carry and crossing the border. Many of those crossing have to mark their cars with children on board signs as they try to escape the constant threat of death. Even as the refugees arrive at temporary facilities where they're given hot meals, uncertainty lingers. A ceasefire is set to go into effect back home, but whether or not the deal stops the violence there are no guarantees they can go home.
Italians today rallied in support of Greece and called for an end to austerity-led policies, carrying flags and banners reading "The Other Europe with Tsipras" and "With Greece against the Troika." The demonstrators gathered in a central Roman square in the early afternoon in a protest organized by Italy's main unions. Many of the participants said they believed the events in Greece have been helping Europe change course. One demonstrator described what is taking place in Greece as a European miracle which affects the whole continent. There were no reports of unrest in the demonstration, although police in riot gear were stationed across the square. The Danish Prime Minister has announced that Denmark is on high alert after a terrorist attack aimed at a controversial Swedish artist took place at a cafe. Witness accounts were conflicted on whether there was one assailant or two, but Danish police have just released photographs of the suspect. Here's more.
Security in central Copenhagen has been tightened after one civilian was killed and 3 policemen were wounded in a shooting at a public meeting in the Danish capital. These images of the aftermath show a glass door and window peppered with bullet holes. The target of the attack was controversial Swedish caricature artist Lars Vilks, who has received death threats since publishing inappropriate images of the Prophet Muhammad. Vilks has lived under constant protection by the Swedish police since 2010, and 2 years ago an American woman who called herself Jihad Jane was sentenced to 10 years in prison for plotting to kill him.
It's been very difficult to make exhibitions because people are scared, and we come into also other things like I've been accused for racism and things like that. So it's first last year I had the possibility to make exhibitions in a Swedish gallery, and I've been working with that, and these exhibitions have been very successful, so I'm quite optimistic of the future.
Witnesses saw 2 suspects fleeing in a car after the attack on the gathering, which was billed as a debate on art and blasphemy. The shooting hit too close to home for the French ambassador, who was also attending the event, since just over a month ago 17 people were killed in France in 3 days of violence after gunmen burst into the Paris offices of the satirical weekly Charlie Hebdo. French President François Hollande condemned the shooting, stating that several people may have been wounded and that the Interior Minister would go to Copenhagen as soon as possible. Nancy Khair for the news at 10.
To the world of fashion, where designer Monique Lhuillier harkened back to the 1920s for her fall 2015 collection at the Mercedes-Benz Fashion Week in New York. Lhuillier sent 36 looks and models down the runway in garments that ranged from sheath and A-line dresses, pants, blouses, and tuxedo jackets. She created structure with fur, lace, silk, and suede on day and evening pieces. The color palette for this season is dramatic. Deeper tones of plum, lots of midnight blues and teals. Lhuillier also debuted her handbag and shoe collection. A various array of evening bags were constructed with everything from gunmetal accents to lucite. New York Fashion Week will run until the 19th. Barcelona are looking to maintain their impressive current form when they meet and hopefully entertain Levante in a La Liga encounter at the Camp Nou. Lionel Messi will be playing his 300th match tomorrow and will seek to increase the tally he set after breaking Telmozara's league record of 252 goals in November. Barca are second in the league behind Real Madrid, while Atletico Madrid are in third. And with the Champions League last 16 clash at Man City looming at the end of the month and the Clásico against Real Madrid coming up in March, Barcelona's clash against Levante requires full concentration.
Let's welcome the world's
Usain Bolt, the fastest man alive, has announced that he will retire after the 2017 World Championships in London. The multiple world record holder and six-time Olympic gold medal winner had previously hinted the 2016 Rio Olympics would be his last competition, but sponsorship commitments dictated he will continue the following year, where he will focus solely on the 100 meters. The 28-year-old Jamaican holds the world records for the 100 meters, the 200 meters and the 4x100 meters relay. When asked if he will win in Rio, Bolt was confident, saying he wanted to be remembered as one of the greatest sportsmen ever. And finally, a look at the weather. Cold conditions continue tonight with partly cloudy skies and southwesterly light winds. Tomorrow, unstable weather affects the kingdom, creating a possibility for thunderstorms accompanied by hail in the southern regions, gradually extending to other parts of the kingdom. Light snow is also expected in the southern hilly areas with southwesterly moderate winds. The Gulf of Aqaba can expect some rain showers tomorrow with northerly moderate to brisk winds and slightly choppy seas. The weatherman warns of poor visibility tonight due to fog and frost after midnight in most regions, including the Jordan Valley. He now has a look at temperatures forecast for tonight and tomorrow. And to close, here's a reminder of the day's top stories. The Prime Minister addresses the opening of a three-day conference aimed at drawing up a national strategy on fighting fanaticism amid a growing threat from terrorist groups in the region. GCC ministers at an extraordinary meeting in Saudi Arabia call on the United Nations to take forceful action over Yemen amid concerns the country is collapsing after the Houthis took control. And at least one civilian is killed and 3 police wounded in a shooting at a meeting in Copenhagen, attended by a controversial artist responsible for publishing offensive caricatures of Prophet Muhammad. And with this, we come to the end of this edition of the news. I'm Ali Tupan. Thank you for joining us and have a good night.